The pen was a Mont Blanc. His. He'd left it on the table like a trophy, like the whole thing was already decided, and I was just there to make it official. I picked it up slowly, found page 1, flipped through without expression, page 3, page 5, and then page 7. I stayed there for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to confirm what I already knew was there. Then I kept going until I reached the signature line. I signed my name the way my mother taught me. Slow, every letter, like it meant something. Because it did. I set the pen down, looked across the table at Marcus, and smiled. Not the smile he was used to. A different one. He was already reaching for his phone. He never looked up. He never read page 7. Before we go any further, what time is it? Where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I want to know who's staying up with me for this one. The company started with a folding table and a laptop that overheated if you ran more than 2 programs at once. I know because I was the one who propped it up on a hardcover copy of the Georgia Business Code every night so the fan could breathe. Marcus thought that was funny. He'd walk past the dining room around 11, glance at me, still working, and say something like, "You and that computer," then disappear into the bedroom. By the time I came to bed, he was always asleep. By the time he woke up, I was usually already back at the table. That was 2012. We'd been married 2 years. We were living in a 2-bedroom rental off Cascade Road in southwest Atlanta, the kind of neighborhood where everybody knew everybody's business except their own. The rent was $1.140 a month. I remember the exact number because I was the one who transferred it on the 1st of every month, right after I transferred the minimum payment on the 2 credit cards we'd maxed out getting the business off the ground. Marcus had the ideas. I want to be fair about that. He had the kind of energy that filled a room, the kind of confidence that made investors lean forward in their chairs. When he talked about Ardent Group, that's what we called it, Ardent, because I'd read somewhere that the word meant passionate and burning, and I thought that was what we were. He made it sound inevitable, like the company already existed somewhere in the future and we were just catching up to it. What he didn't have was the follow-through, the contracts, the filings, the vendor negotiations, the quarterly projections. That was me. The 2 a.m. spreadsheets, the cold calls to distributors in cities I'd never visited, the 14-page compliance documents I taught myself to read, because we couldn't afford a lawyer yet. That was me. I'm not saying Marcus did nothing. I'm saying I did everything that required sitting still and doing the hard, quiet work that nobody sees until the day it saves you. And Ardent grew. Slowly at first, then faster than either of us expected. By 2016, we had 11 employees and a real office in Midtown, the kind with glass walls and a reception desk and a coffee machine that cost more than my first car. Marcus got his picture in Atlanta Business Chronicle. I framed it and put it on his desk. He thanked me by taking a client to dinner that night and not inviting me. I told myself that was fine, that we were building something together, even if only one of us was getting the bylines. I told myself that for a long time. The thing about building something from nothing is that it becomes part of your body, not metaphorically. I mean, you carry it the way you carry an old injury, always aware of it, always adjusting your posture around it. Ardent was in my shoulders, in the way I tensed when the quarterly numbers came in late, in the way I could not fully relax at any dinner or vacation or anniversary weekend because some part of my brain was always running projections. Marcus did not carry it that way. I see that clearly now. For him, Ardent was a vehicle, something to ride. For me, it was something I had grown inside my own chest and could not imagine existing without. By 2019, we had 34 employees. By 2021, 61. We'd expanded into commercial real estate consulting, and Marcus had started wearing Berluti loafers and talking about a place in Buckhead. I did not begrudge him the loafers. What I noticed quietly was that he had also started arriving at the office later and leaving earlier, and that there was a new energy to him that had nothing to do with Ardent. I filed it away. That's what I do. I don't react. I observe, I document, I wait. My mother used to say that patience is not weakness. She said most people confuse the two because they've never seen patience deployed as a weapon. I thought about her a lot in those years. I thought about the way she raised me after my father left, not with bitterness, not with drama, but with a kind of focused precision that made our small house on the east side of Atlanta feel impenetrable. She worked 2 jobs and never once complained in front of me. What she did instead was plan. Every decision she made was 3 moves ahead. I am my mother's daughter. And in 2023, when I first began to understand what was coming, I did not cry. I did not confront. I sat down at my desk, not the folding table anymore, but a custom walnut desk I'd had made by a craftsman in Decatur, and I opened a new document, and I began to think very carefully about page 7. It was a Thursday in October when I found the shirt. Not found the way you stumble onto something. Found the way you've been half looking for something for months, without admitting to yourself that you're looking, and then one ordinary afternoon, it's just there in your hands, undeniable. I was sorting laundry. Marcus had left a pile on the bathroom floor the way he always did. Dress shirts, undershirts, the occasional gym clothes he wore more for appearance than exercise. I'd stopped asking him to sort his own laundry somewhere around year 4 of our marriage. It wasn't worth the conversation. I'd learned early that there were certain battles that cost more energy than they saved. And I'd developed a precise internal accounting system for which ones were worth fighting and which ones I simply absorbed and moved on from. I picked up the blue Oxford, the Canali one, the one he wore to client dinners because he said the color made him look trustworthy, and something fell out of the breast pocket. A receipt. Candle and Rye, which was a restaurant in Virginia Highland I'd never been to with him. The date was a Saturday 3 weeks prior. A Saturday he'd told me he was playing golf with Derek Okafor. I set the receipt on the edge of the sink. Then I lifted the shirt to toss it into the hamper, and I caught it faint low sitting in the fabric of the collar in a way that laundering would have erased if I'd moved any faster. A perfume. Not mine. Something warmer, heavier than what I wore. The kind of scent that announces itself in an elevator before the person wearing it has fully stepped inside. I stood there for a moment with the shirt in my hands. My heart did not race. That's the part I remember most clearly, that my body did not panic. My pulse stayed even. My breathing stayed even. What happened instead was a kind of cold, clarifying stillness, the same stillness I get when I'm reading a contract. And I find a clause that changes the meaning of everything that came before it. I folded the shirt. I put it in the hamper. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water and drank it standing at the counter looking out at the backyard where Marcus had installed a fire pit 2 summers ago that we had used exactly once. Then I went back to my desk and I opened my laptop. And I did something I had never done in 12 years of marriage. I started keeping notes, not accusatory notes, not emotional ones. Dates, times, inconsistencies. The receipt from Candle and Rye. The Saturday golf game that Derek Okafor I checked casually at a cookout the following weekend had no memory of. The new gym bag Marcus had bought that he kept in his car instead of bringing inside. The way his phone, which had always lived screen up on the kitchen counter, had migrated permanently to his pocket. I documented everything in a folder I named Q4 Budget Projections because Marcus would never open anything with that title. What I was not doing, I want to be clear, was building a case out of jealousy. What I was doing was what I always do, with incomplete information, collecting data points, until a pattern emerges that is too coherent to be coincidence. I have run a business for 11 years. I know the difference between a variance and a trend. This was a trend. By November, I had 6 weeks of documentation. By the first week of December, I had a name. Not because I went looking for it directly, but because Marcus left his iPad on the kitchen island one morning while he went to shower, and a notification came through from a number saved only as S. And the preview text was 4 words that told me everything. I didn't touch the iPad. I didn't need to. I photographed the notification with my phone, added it to the Q4 budget projections folder, and had breakfast ready by the time Marcus came downstairs. He ate. He kissed me on the cheek. He told me I looked nice. I thanked him. What I was thinking while he gathered his keys and his jacket and walked out the front door to his car was not about the woman. The woman was almost irrelevant. What I was thinking about was the company, about the 11 years of 2 a.m. spreadsheets and cold calls and compliance documents, about whose name was on the original operating agreement and whose name had been quietly repositioned over the years as Marcus's public profile grew and mine stayed in the background where the real work gets done. I was thinking about what a divorce would look like if Marcus controlled the narrative, if he filed first, if he got to decide what the settlement looked like before I'd had time to prepare. And I was thinking about my lawyer. Not the firm we used for Ardent. I would need someone Marcus didn't know. Someone very good. Someone who understood that the most powerful move in any negotiation is the one your opponent doesn't see coming until the ink is already dry. I called her that afternoon. Her name was Vivian Cole. She had a reputation in Atlanta legal circles for being precise, quiet, and ruthless in a way that never showed up in her voice. We met for coffee at a place in Ponce Highland the following Tuesday. I brought the folder. All of it. She read through everything without changing her expression. Then she set it down, picked up her cup, and said, "Tell me about the operating agreement." I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I smiled for real. "That," I said, "is exactly what I wanted to talk about." Marcus chose a Friday night to end our marriage. Not a quiet Friday. Not a stay-home Friday, where the conversation could at least be contained within our own walls. He chose the 3rd Friday of December, which was the night my parents hosted their annual dinner, the one my mother had been cooking for since Tuesday, the one my father drove 40 minutes from Stonecrest to attend, the one where my younger sister Diane and her husband always came with the kids, and the noise, and the sweet potato pie that my mother made from a recipe she'd never written down. Marcus knew the dinner. He'd attended it every year for 12 years. He chose it anyway. We arrived together, which I think he planned deliberately. Arriving together meant I couldn't leave without making a scene, and Marcus had always understood with a predator's precision exactly which exits to block before he started a fire. Dinner was good. My mother had made oxtail and rice-collared greens with smoked turkey cornbread in the cast-iron skillet she'd had since before I was born. My father was in a good mood, telling the same 3 stories he always told, and Diane's youngest kept climbing off his chair to show everyone a loose tooth he'd been working on for 2 weeks. It was warm. It was loud. It was the specific kind of loud that only exists when people who genuinely love each other are in the same room. Marcus was quiet through most of it. I noticed. My mother noticed too. I caught her watching him twice, with that particular stillness she gets when she's cataloging something she'll address later in private. It was after dessert. The kids had migrated to the living room. My father had poured bourbon. Diane was helping my mother clear plates. Marcus set his glass down on the table, cleared his throat the way he does when he's about to say something he's rehearsed, and said, "I think this is a good time to let everyone know that Kennedy and I have decided to move forward with a divorce." The room did not go silent immediately. It went silent in stages, my father's bourbon glass stopping halfway to his mouth, Diane appearing in the doorway with 2 plates still in her hands, my mother turning from the counter with an expression I had never seen on her face before and hoped to never see again. I did not react. That was the part Marcus had not rehearsed for. He'd expected tears or anger or some visible fracture, something he could manage and redirect. What he got was me sitting completely still with my hands folded on the table. Looking at him with an expression that I have been told on more than one occasion is extremely difficult to read. My father said Marcus. Just the name, nothing after it. Marcus said they had discussed it, and it was a mutual decision, and he hoped everyone could be respectful of the process. He used the word process. At my parents' dinner table after 12 years, he used the word process. My mother set down the dish she was holding very carefully. She walked to the table and sat down. She looked at Marcus for a long moment, and then she looked at me, and whatever she saw in my face made something shift in hers, not relief exactly, but a loosening of the alarm that had just arrived there. She knew me. She knew that face. Diane broke the silence by saying, "I'm going to check on the kids," and disappearing, which was Diane's way of removing herself from a situation before she said something she couldn't take back. Marcus talked for another 4 minutes. I counted. He said things about growing apart and different seasons of life and wanting to handle everything with dignity and respect. He had clearly workshopped this speech. It had the cadence of something that had been practiced in the mirror. When he finished, I said, "Thank you for telling them." That was all. He blinked. He'd expected more. He needed more. He needed me to react so he could position himself as the reasonable one. My stillness denied him that, and I watched him recalibrate in real time, watched him reach for his bourbon and straighten his watch the way he always does when the ground has shifted under him and he needs a moment to find his footing. My mother walked me to my car at the end of the night. We stood in the driveway under the December cold, and she held both my hands and searched my face. "Kennedy," she said. "I know, Mama." "Do you have a plan?" I thought about Vivian Cole. I thought about the meeting we'd had the week prior and the one scheduled for Tuesday, and the very specific conversation we'd had about the operating agreement, and what Georgia law said about marital assets, and what a carefully constructed contract could accomplish if the other party was too arrogant to read past page 6. "Yes," I said. She squeezed my hands once. She didn't ask what the plan was. My mother has always understood that some information is safest when it lives in only one place. I drove home alone. Marcus had left before me. He'd said he had an early morning, which we both understood to mean something else entirely. The house was quiet when I got in. I went to my office, opened my laptop, opened the document I'd been building with Vivian, and spent the next 2 hours reviewing page 7. By midnight, it was exactly what I needed it to be. I saved the document. I closed the laptop. I went to bed and slept without interruption for the first time in 3 months. Vivian Cole's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Road that had no signage in the lobby. That was the first thing I noticed when I came for our second meeting. No directory board, no firm name etched in marble. Nothing to indicate what happened on any of the floors above the reception desk. Just a neutral-faced woman who asked for my name made a call and sent me to elevator bank B without further explanation. I appreciated that. There is a particular kind of discretion that announces itself by refusing to announce anything at all. Vivienne was already at the table when I walked in. She had a yellow legal pad, a pen she never uncapped, and a copy of Ardent Group's original operating agreement that she had clearly read in full because the margins were dense with her handwriting in a script so small I couldn't read it from across the table. She did not offer pleasantries. She said, "Sit down, I want to talk about the equity structure." I sat. What followed was 3 hours that changed everything. The original operating agreement for Ardent Group, filed in 2012, listed Kennedy Ardent. I had used my own name for the company, a decision Marcus had called sentimental at the time, as the majority stakeholder with 60% equity. Marcus held 35%. The remaining 5% had been allocated to a silent investor who'd bought out his share in 2017, and whose portion had reverted to the company, which at that point meant effectively to me. Over the years, as Ardent grew, and Marcus's public role expanded. Certain administrative changes had been made. Titles shifted. Marcus became president and CEO on paper, a change I had agreed to because I was running operations and didn't need the title as long as I controlled the structure. What I had not done, what I was careful never to do, was sign anything that altered the equity split. Marcus did not know that. Or rather, and this is the part that still astonishes me when I think about it, he had convinced himself over 11 years of being the face of the company, the one in the Chronicle, the one on the panels at the National Black Business Summit. That the equity reflected what he believed to be true about his own importance. He had never gone back to read the original filing. Why would he? In his mind, the story of Ardent was his story. I was operational support. Capable, yes. Essential, perhaps. But support. Vivienne explained what this meant for the divorce proceedings with the calm specificity of someone reading a weather report. Under Georgia law, business equity established before or during a marriage could be treated as marital property depending on how it was documented and how both parties had behaved in relation to it. Marcus's legal team would almost certainly argue that Ardent was a marital asset subject to equitable division. Almost certainly, I said. Yes, Vivienne said, which is why what we do next matters enormously. What we did next took 11 weeks. I will not describe all of it in detail. Some of it was technical in ways that would require a law degree to fully appreciate. And some of it was simply the grinding, unglamorous work of documentation that I have been doing my entire professional life. But the core of it was this: Vivienne and I constructed a divorce settlement agreement that was on its surface generous to Marcus. Reasonable. The kind of document that his lawyers would read and find unremarkable. A division of personal assets, the house in Buckhead, which Marcus wanted, and which I was content to let him have retirement accounts, vehicles, the vacation property in Hilton Head we'd stopped using 3 years ago. Everything Marcus cared about was addressed clearly and fairly in the first 6 pages. Page 7 was different. Page 7 contained a single clause drafted by Vivienne, with the precision of someone who had been doing this for 23 years, that addressed the disposition of Kennedy's premarital and separately documented business equity in Ardent Group, LLC. The clause was written in the dense, subordinate, heavy language of corporate law, the kind of language that causes the eye to slide forward in search of something more legible. It referenced 3 prior filings by case number. It used the phrase reaffirmation of original equity position, rather than transfer or award, because reaffirmation implies nothing is changing hands, merely being confirmed, which is a distinction that matters enormously when a judge reviews it later. What it did in plain language was establish unambiguously and irrevocably that 65% of Ardent Group, my original 60% plus the 5% that had reverted from the silent investor, belonged solely to Kennedy. Not as a divorce settlement, as a confirmation of what had always been true. Marcus's lawyers reviewed the document. They focused, as Vivienne had predicted they would, on the house and the Hilton Head property and the retirement split, which were the numbers Marcus had told them to prioritize. They sent back 3 rounds of minor revisions, all of which concerned pages 1 through 6. Not one revision touched page 7. I read their final approval on a Tuesday morning in February, sitting at my walnut desk with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I was reading. I set my phone down. I looked out the window at the bare oak in the backyard, the one Marcus had wanted to cut down because he said it blocked the light. I had always liked that tree. I picked up my phone and called Vivienne. They approved it, I said. All of it. All of it. There was a pause. Then she said, "Then we're ready." We scheduled the signing for the following Thursday. A neutral location, a conference room at a title company in Sandy Springs, chosen because it was equidistant from both our lawyers' offices and because it was the kind of beige, unremarkable space that invited no one to linger. Marcus wanted to get it done quickly. He had mentioned through his attorney that he was hoping to close on the Buckhead house by end of quarter. I told Vivienne I was fine with Thursday. I spent the days between the approval and the signing, doing exactly what I always do, working. I reviewed Ardent's Q1 projections. I had a call with our new commercial real estate partners in Charlotte. I answered emails and attended a board prep meeting and ate lunch at my desk 3 out of 5 days. On Wednesday night, I laid out what I would wear. A deep charcoal suit structured the kind that doesn't invite conversation about itself. My gold bracelet, low heels, nothing that announced anything. I went to sleep at 10:30. I did not lie awake. I did not rehearse. There was nothing left to rehearse. Everything that needed to be in place was already in place. Marcus was 12 minutes late to the signing. I know because I was there 8 minutes early, which is how I arrived to everything that matters. And I sat in that beige conference room in Sandy Springs and watched the clock on the wall move from 9:00 to 9:12. Before I heard his voice in the hallway, loud, unhurried, the particular volume of a man who has decided that his lateness is everyone else's problem to absorb. He came in with his attorney, a man named Garrett Fitch, who wore pocket squares and had the handshake of someone who'd practiced it. Marcus was in a navy suit. New shoes, I didn't recognize them, which meant he'd bought them recently, which meant he was performing for someone, either the room or himself. He looked good. I will say that plainly because it is true, and because the truth of it is irrelevant to everything that followed. He glanced at me when he sat down. Not a long glance. The kind you give a situation you've already decided you've handled. "Kennedy," he said. "Marcus," I said. Vivienne was to my left, her legal pad open, her uncapped pen finally in use. Garrett Fitch arranged his own papers with the efficiency of someone billing by the 6-minute increment. The title company representative, a quiet woman named Lorraine, who I suspect had witnessed enough of these signings to have become permanently unshockable, set the documents in the center of the table and explained the process in a voice that suggested she could do it in her sleep. Marcus did not read the document. I want to say that again because it is the fact upon which everything else turns. Marcus Elliott Reed, who had spent 11 years presenting himself as the strategic mind behind Ardent Group, who had sat across from investors and talked about due diligence and risk assessment, and the importance of understanding what you're signing before you sign it, did not read the document. Garrett Fitch read it, or appeared to. He turned pages at the pace of someone performing thoroughness rather than practicing it, his eyes moving with the smooth regularity of a man who had already decided the document was acceptable and was now simply providing the visual evidence of review that his client expected. He paused twice, once on page 2, where the house transfer was outlined, and once on page 4, where the retirement accounts were addressed. He made a small note on page 4. He did not pause on page 7. Marcus during this time was on his phone. Not obviously. He had it angled below the table edge, which is a gesture I have watched him make in every meeting he didn't want to be in for the past 6 years. His thumb moved with a small rhythmic flick of someone scrolling. I did not look long enough to see what he was reading. It didn't matter. Garrett Fitch said, "Everything looks consistent with what we discussed." Marcus pocketed his phone. He picked up the pen, his own pen, a different Mont Blanc than the one he'd left on the table at our kitchen the night we'd first discussed this, but the same brand, because Marcus had always understood the performance of certain objects, and he signed where Lorraine indicated. Page 1, page 3, page 5. The final signature page. He did not turn to page 7. He set the pen down and sat back in his chair with the exhale of a man releasing something he'd been carrying, which struck me as almost funny, given what he did not yet know he was about to pick up. Then it was my turn. I took my time. Not theatrically, I wasn't performing for Marcus. I had never been performing for Marcus. That was always his register, not mine. I simply moved at my own pace, which is the pace of someone who has read every word of every document placed in front of her since the age of 19. I turned to page 1. I signed. Page 3, I signed. Page 5, page 7. I stayed there for exactly 3 seconds. The same 3 seconds I'd taken in my head 100 times over the past 11 weeks. Then I signed. Kennedy Ardent, slow and clean every letter. I continued to the final page and signed there too. I set the pen down. I looked up at Marcus, and I smiled the same smile I'd given him at the kitchen table when we'd first discussed this, the one he hadn't known how to read then, and still didn't know how to read now. He interpreted it as relief. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped another inch, the satisfaction of a man who believes the woman across from him has finally accepted the inevitable. He thought the smile meant I was done, that I was folding gracefully the way he'd always assumed I eventually would when pushed hard enough. "I think that's everything," Garrett Fitch said. "It is," Vivian said. She was already closing her folder. Lorraine collected the documents with the brisk efficiency of someone with a 10:30 appointment. Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket, and extended his hand to Garrett Fitch in the manner of men congratulating each other on the conclusion of a business transaction, which I suppose in his mind was exactly what this was. He nodded at me on his way to the door. Cordial, almost magnanimous. "Take care of yourself, Kennedy," he said. I said, "You too, Marcus." He left. His footsteps in the hallway were unhurried. I heard him laugh at something Garrett said, a short, released laugh, the laugh of a man who has just walked out of a room believing he has won. Vivian waited until the hallway was quiet. Then she turned to me and said simply, 30 days. That was how long it would take for the filing to be processed and recorded with the state. 30 days before Ardent Group's equity structure was officially, irrevocably, publicly confirmed with Kennedy as 65% majority owner. 30 days before Marcus would find out what was on page 7. I picked up my bag. I straightened my bracelet. I thanked Lorraine, who gave me a look that was almost imperceptibly warmer than the professional neutrality she'd maintained throughout, as if she'd understood more of what had just happened than her role required her to acknowledge. I walked out into the February morning. The air was cold and sharp and smelled like rain coming. I did not celebrate. I did not call anyone. I drove back to the Ardent offices in Midtown, went upstairs, sat at my desk, and spent the rest of the day doing exactly what I had done every day for 11 years. I worked. The call came on a Monday morning, 33 days after the signing. Not from Marcus, from his attorney. Garrett Fitch called Vivian at 8:47 a.m. I know the exact time because Vivian texted me immediately after and included it the way she includes all details she considers relevant, which is all of them. The text said Fitch called. They found page 7. Call me when you're free. I was in the middle of reviewing a vendor contract when the text came through. I set the contract aside. I picked up my coffee. I looked out the window at Midtown Atlanta, waking up below me the morning traffic on West Peachtree, the construction crane on the building going up 2 blocks south, the particular gray-gold light of a March morning that can't quite decide if it wants to be winter or spring. I finished my coffee. Then I called Vivian. She answered on the first ring. "Fitch is requesting an emergency meeting," she said without preamble. He's using the word emergency. He used it 3 times in a 4-minute call, which tells you everything about the state of his client right now. What did you tell him? That we're available Wednesday at 2. That our schedule before then is unfortunately full. I smiled. Wednesday is fine. What had happened, Vivian explained, was exactly what we had engineered it to happen. The divorce filing had been processed and recorded by the state of Georgia on day 28. Standard procedure required notification to all parties named in relevant business filings when equity positions were confirmed or altered. Ardent Group's registered agent, a detail I had quietly updated 8 months prior, replacing the shared service Marcus and I had used with a firm that reported exclusively to me, had received the state confirmation and filed the corresponding update with the Georgia Secretary of State's office. Marcus's accountant had found it first. Not Marcus, not Garrett Fitch. His accountant, a meticulous man named Bernard, who handled the books for 6 of Marcus's personal investments, had been preparing Q1 financial statements when he pulled Ardent's corporate registry and found an entry that did not match what he had on file. He called Marcus. Marcus called Fitch. Fitch pulled the divorce settlement and turned finally to page 7. Vivian told me that according to Fitch's call, Marcus's first response had been that there must be a mistake. A clerical error. Something that could be corrected with a phone call and an amended filing. Fitch had apparently spent the better part of Sunday afternoon explaining to his client that what was on page 7 was not a mistake, was not a clerical error, and could not be corrected, amended, or undone, because Marcus had signed the document voluntarily in the presence of counsel with full legal capacity, and the 30-day contestation window had elapsed 4 days ago. Marcus's second response Fitch did not relay directly, but Vivian said she could infer it from the controlled tension in Fitch's voice when he called the particular stiffness of an attorney managing a client who was not behaving well. I thought about Marcus in that moment. I thought about the way he straightens his watch when the ground shifts under him. I wondered how many times he'd straightened it since Sunday afternoon. "Wednesday at 2, I said. "Wednesday at 2, Vivian confirmed. "Wear the charcoal suit." I almost laughed. "You've never told me what to wear before." "I've never needed to," she said. "Wednesday is different. Wednesday you're walking in as majority owner of a 61-person company. I want that to be the first thing Fitch sees when you enter the room." I thought about that after I hung up. About what it meant to walk into a room differently. I had spent 11 years walking into rooms as the woman behind Marcus, the operational one, the quiet one, the one who knew where every file was and what every contract said and how much everything cost and why. I had walked into rooms and been introduced as his wife, his partner, in the loosest sense occasionally as a member of the Ardent team, in the way that suggested team rather than founder. Wednesday, I would walk in as something else. I went back to the vendor contract. I finished reviewing it. I sent my notes to our operations director, a sharp woman named Priya, who had been with Ardent for 4 years and who I had been quietly preparing for a larger role. I had 3 more meetings that afternoon, and I was present in all of them. That evening, I drove to my mother's house. I didn't call ahead. I just drove the familiar route to the east side, parked in her driveway, and knocked on the door, even though she'd given me a key 20 years ago, and still looked slightly offended every time I used it. She opened the door, looked at my face, and said, "Come eat something." We sat at her kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten every significant meal of my childhood, the same table where I'd done homework, and had difficult conversations and learned by watching her that the right kind of quiet was more powerful than almost any noise. She heated up leftover rice and chicken and put it in front of me without asking what I wanted, because she already knew. I told her about page 7. Not the legal specifics, she didn't need those, but the shape of it. What it meant, what came next. She listened without interrupting, which is her way. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Your grandmother used to say that the best move you can make is the one they don't see until it's already done." "I know," I said. "You've told me." "I told you," she said, "because it's true." She refilled my water without being asked. We talked about other things for a while. Diane's youngest had finally lost the tooth my father was thinking about retiring in the spring. A neighbor had planted something in their front yard that my mother found architecturally offensive. When I left, she walked me to the door and held my face in both her hands, the way she had when I was small, the way she did at every moment that mattered. "Wednesday," I said. "Wednesday," she agreed. I drove home through the Atlanta night, the city lit up on all sides, and I thought about 65%, about what it meant as a number, about what it had always meant long before any document confirmed it, in the 2 a.m. spreadsheets, in the vendor calls, in the compliance documents I'd taught myself to read because we couldn't yet afford a lawyer. 65% had always been mine. Page 7 had simply made it legible. What Marcus had signed away was not something I had taken from him. What Marcus had signed away was the illusion that he had ever owned it in the first place. Wednesday at 2, Garrett Fitch would walk into a room expecting a negotiation. He would arrive with arguments about contestation and equitable intent and the possibility of judicial review. He would have a yellow legal pad and a strategy. What he would find instead was Vivian Cole and me, already seated, already prepared, already done. Vivian and I arrived at the Buckhead office tower at 1:41 p.m. We took the elevator to the 22nd floor, which was Fitch's firm. Not the title company this time. Not neutral ground, his territory, which Vivian had agreed to deliberately because she wanted Marcus to feel the safety of his own walls before she removed them. We were shown to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Peachtree Road and a table long enough to seat 14. Someone had put a water pitcher in the center. Vivian poured herself a glass. I did not. We sat on the same side of the table, which Vivian had also specified when confirming the meeting. Same side meant Marcus and Fitch would have to sit across from us and look at us directly for the entire duration. No angle, no peripheral positioning. Eye contact maintained or avoided would tell us everything we needed to know in the first 4 minutes. They arrived at 2:06. Marcus came in first. He was in a gray suit, not the navy the gray, which on another day I might have read as nothing but today read, as a man who had dressed carefully for a meeting he was dreading. He looked like he had not slept well, not disheveled. Marcus was never disheveled, but there was a tightness around his eyes that I recognized from the 2 or 3 times in our marriage I had watched him absorb genuinely bad news. The watch was already straightened. He must have done it in the hallway. He looked at me when he entered the room. I looked back. Garrett Fitch came in behind him, set his bag on the table with the practiced calm of a man managing his own adrenaline, and took the seat directly across from Vivian. Marcus sat across from me. A paralegal I didn't know settled into a chair at the far end with a laptop, and what I assumed was the roll of documentation. Fitch opened. "We appreciate you making time on short notice." Vivian said, "Of course." She did not add anything to that. Fitch said, "As you're aware, our client has some significant concerns about the language in the settlement document, specifically the clause on page 7, and we'd like to have a candid conversation about the intent of that language, and whether there's a path toward a revised agreement that more accurately reflects." "There isn't," Vivian said. Not unkindly, not aggressively. The way you state a fact about whether. Fitch paused. He recalibrated in the practiced way of experienced litigators, which is to say he barely showed it. "I understand your position, Vivian, but I think if we look at the broader context of how Ardent's equity was managed throughout the marriage, there's an argument to be made that Marcus's contributions are not in dispute," Vivian said. "No one is arguing. Marcus didn't contribute to Ardent. The document doesn't speak to contributions, it speaks to equity. Equity that was established in the original 2012 operating agreement, maintained without interruption or legal alteration through the entirety of the marriage, and confirmed with the signature of your client and his counsel in the settlement filed February 14th. Fitch opened his mouth. Vivian continued. "The contestation window closed March 16th. Today is March 19th. We're not here to negotiate page 7. I'm happy to discuss anything else, but page 7 is done." The room was quiet for a moment. Marcus had been looking at the table during Vivian's last statement. Now he looked up. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face in 12 years. Not anger, not exactly something older and rawer than anger. Something closer to the look of a man who has just understood fully and without remaining ambiguity that he has been outmaneuvered by someone he had fundamentally underestimated for a very long time. I held his gaze. I did not smile. I did not need to. He said Kennedy, just my name, the way my father had said his name at the dinner table in December, just the name, nothing after it. I said, Marcus. He said, you planned this. I said, I've always planned things. You know that about me. He looked away first. Fitch tried for another 40 minutes. He was good, I will give him that. He cycled through 4 distinct legal arguments with the fluency of someone who had spent the weekend preparing them. And Vivian addressed each one with the same unhurried precision, referencing case numbers from memory, citing Georgia precedent, with the ease of someone reciting a grocery list. The paralegal's fingers moved continuously across the laptop keyboard. At one point, Marcus said, "This isn't right." Not as a legal argument. As a statement of feeling, which was the first time I could remember him expressing one in a professional context. I said, "A lot of things weren't right, Marcus." He didn't respond to that. He straightened his watch. Fitch made one final attempt, a suggestion that both parties might benefit from a mediated conversation about a potential equity buyout, a structured arrangement by which Marcus could reacquire a meaningful stake in Ardent over a defined period. It was not an unreasonable proposal in the abstract. It was the proposal of a man trying to find any door that was still open. I looked at Vivian. She gave me the smallest nod. This was my decision, not hers. I looked at Marcus. I thought about the folding table and the overheating laptop, and the $1.140 rent, and the 2 a.m. spreadsheets, and every room I had walked out of early so he could be the one who stayed and got the credit. I thought about December's dinner table and the word process. I thought about a receipt from Candle and Rye falling out of a breast pocket, and a perfume that wasn't mine settling into a collar that was supposed to be. I said, but no. One word. The same way he had once said, "Sign it, Kennedy." Don't make this ugly. One word, clean and final. And then I picked up my bag. And I looked at Garrett Fitch and thanked him for his time. And I looked at the paralegal who was still typing. And I did not look at Marcus again. Vivian and I rode the elevator down in silence. In the lobby, she said, "That was well done." I said, "Thank you for Wednesday." She said, "Thank you for page 7. We parted on Peachtree Road the March afternoon, bright and cold. Around us, the city moving in every direction, with the ordinary momentum of a day that did not know it was significant. I walked to my car. I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. Then I called Priya. "Clear my 4 o'clock, I said. "I want to do a full leadership team meeting instead. There are some things I'd like to discuss about Ardent's direction going forward." She said, "I'll set it up. Everything okay?" "Everything," I said, "is exactly as it should be." The call Marcus made to his personal attorney on Thursday morning was not the first domino. It was the sound of the first domino hitting the second. I know the sequence, because Atlanta's business community, for all its size and ambition, operates the way all communities of concentrated wealth operate, through a network of people who know each other's accountants, attend each other's charity galas, and have enough overlapping interests to ensure that significant information rarely stays contained for long. Within 48 hours of the Wednesday meeting, 3 people I trusted had mentioned in 3 separate conversations that Marcus was making calls. Not quiet calls, calls that people were noticing. He called 2 board members. Ardent had a 3-person advisory board men Marcus had recruited and cultivated over the years, men who had always related to him as the face of the company. He told them there had been a legal misunderstanding in the divorce settlement, and that he was pursuing correction through the courts. He used the phrase hostile action, which I found interesting given that everything I had done had been entirely consensual and documented and signed by his own hand. He called Bernard his accountant and asked him to prepare a financial analysis demonstrating Marcus's contributions to Ardent's growth, the kind of document that sounds like evidence, until someone points out it isn't evidence of equity, only of participation. And then on Friday afternoon, he did the thing that told me he was truly desperate. He called Sienna. Not to reconcile, I don't believe that was the intent, or if it was secondary. He called her the way people call someone when the structure they've built their confidence on has collapsed, and they need a voice that will tell them they are still who they thought they were. I know this because Sienna, it turned out, had a friend who knew Diane. And Diane called me Saturday morning from her car, speaking quietly because her kids were in the house, to tell me what she'd heard. Sienna had not been receptive. Diane said, apparently she asked him what his net worth was, and when he told her, she said she needed to think about some things. I said, that tracks. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Kenny, are you okay, like actually okay? I thought about it genuinely before I answered, which is something I've learned to do, to actually check rather than respond reflexively. I looked around my home office. The walnut desk, the framed photo of my mother and me at Ardent's, opening the view of the backyard or oak that Marcus had wanted to cut down. I checked my body for the things that had lived there for months, the low-frequency tension, the hypervigilance, the grinding awareness of what was coming. They were gone. Yes, I said. I'm actually okay. On Monday, Marcus filed a motion for judicial review of the settlement agreement. Vivian called me at 9:15 a.m. to tell me, her voice carrying the particular note of someone who has been expecting exactly this and is already prepared for it. She said, Fitch filed this morning. Grounds are mutual mistake of fact and inadequate disclosure. They'll argue you knew Marcus hadn't read page 7 and exploited the oversight. Can they win? I asked. No, she said without hesitation. Mutual mistake requires both parties to have been mistaken. You were not mistaken. You knew exactly what was on page 7, and you signed it knowingly. That's not mutual mistake, that's unilateral oversight, and unilateral oversight by a party represented by counsel. Which Marcus is not grounds for contract reformation in Georgia. Fitch knows this. The motion is a pressure tactic. How long does it play out? I'll file our response by Wednesday. Judge will likely dismiss within 3 to 4 weeks. Maybe less. Judge Harmon, who's assigned to this, has seen this argument before and doesn't have patience for it. I said, file the response. What happened over those 3 weeks was not dramatic in the way Marcus had perhaps hoped. There were no courtroom confrontations, no emergency hearings, no moments of cinematic tension. What there was instead was the quiet, grinding machinery of Georgia civil procedure doing exactly what it was designed to do, which was protect agreements made between consenting adults represented by legal counsel. Marcus's motion was denied on a Tuesday afternoon, 22 days after it was filed. Vivian texted me the word, dismissed. I was in a meeting with Priya and our new commercial real estate director when the text came through. I read it, set my phone face down on the table, and continued the meeting. What I did not know until that evening was what was happening simultaneously on the other side of the city. Sienna had in fact reached her conclusion about what she needed to think about. She had returned to Marcus's Buckhead house, the house that was now solely his, the house I had signed over without hesitation. Because I had understood long before the signing that the house was not the asset worth keeping, and she had asked him directly what his financial position now looked like. Marcus had told her the truth. I don't know why. Perhaps because he was tired of managing perceptions. Perhaps because the motion being dismissed had taken something out of him that he hadn't fully had to spare. She left that evening. She took the ring, a cushion-cut solitaire Marcus had purchased in January, which I had heard about from Diane, with the detached interest of someone observing a transaction that has nothing to do with them, and she left it on the kitchen counter next to his keys. Diane told me this too. Diane, it had become clear, had sources I hadn't known she had. I said, "How do you know all of this?" She said, "Sienna's friend is in my spin class. Atlanta is extremely small." I almost laughed. I did laugh, actually, a real one. The kind that comes from somewhere low in the chest, the kind I hadn't felt in months. Diane laughed too, and for a few minutes, we were just two sisters on the phone, laughing about the smallness of the city we grew up in, which was its own kind of homecoming. That night, I sat in my backyard, for the first time since fall. I brought a blanket and a glass of wine, and I sat in one of the chairs by the fire pit, the one Marcus had installed, the one we'd used exactly once, and I looked up at the oak tree, its new March leaves just beginning to come in pale green and tentative against the dark. The city hummed around me at its usual frequency. I thought about 11 years. About what gets built in 11 years, and what gets lost, and what turns out upon close examination to have never been lost at all, only obscured temporarily by the accumulated weight of someone else's certainty about who was important and who was not. I thought about the folding table. I thought about page 7. I finished my wine. I went inside. I locked the back door and turned off the kitchen light and walked through my house, which had always been my house in every way that mattered, and I went to bed. I slept without interruption. In the morning, I had a company to run. The email arrived on a Wednesday, 6 weeks after the motion was dismissed. It came from a man named Conrad Osei, managing partner of Osei Capital, one of the most quietly influential private equity firms operating in the Southeast. I knew the name. Everyone in Atlanta's business community knew the name. Conrad Osei had been in the room at 3 of the last 5 major commercial real estate deals in Georgia, and had the reputation of someone who did not reach out unless he had already decided the conversation was worth having. The subject line was Ardent Group Conversation Request. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Vivian with a single line. "Interesting timing." She replied 4 minutes later, "Very. Take the meeting." I had met Conrad Osei exactly once at a National Black Business Summit panel 3 years prior, the same panel where Marcus had been a featured speaker and I had been in the 3rd row of the audience. Conrad had been on the panel. I had introduced myself briefly afterward during the reception, given him my card, and watched him give Marcus his card first when Marcus appeared at my shoulder. He had not emailed Marcus. He had emailed me. I took the meeting the following Monday. His office was in a restored building in Sweet Auburn. The historic district deliberate, the kind of address that signals a specific set of values about where money comes from and what it owes. The office itself was spare and considered. No excess. Books on actual shelves that appeared to have been read. A framed photograph of his mother on the credenza behind his desk, which I noticed and filed away as the kind of detail that tells you something true about a person. Conrad Osei was 61 years old, compact and deliberate in the way of someone who had learned early that economy of movement signals confidence more effectively than its opposite. He shook my hand and looked at me directly and said, "I've been watching Ardent for about 4 years. I should have called sooner." I said, "You're calling now." He almost smiled. "I'm calling now." What followed was 90 minutes that I will not fully detail here, because some conversations earn their privacy. What I will say is that Conrad had done his homework, not the homework of someone who had pulled Ardent's public filings the week before, but the homework of someone who had been paying attention for years, who knew our revenue trajectory and our client retention rate and our expansion into Charlotte, and the specific quality of the commercial real estate partnerships we had built in the last 18 months. He also knew, because Atlanta was extremely small, what had happened with the divorce. He did not raise it directly. What he said at one point was, "I've watched companies built by one person and credited to another. It's more common than it should be. It's also usually visible to people paying attention." I said, "And you were paying attention." "To Ardent's numbers, yes," he said. Numbers don't lie about who's actually running a company. He outlined a potential strategic partnership, Osei Capital taking a minority stake in Ardent, bringing their network and their capital to bear on an aggressive expansion into 3 new markets over 24 months. He was specific about what he wanted and what he was offering, which I respected because vagueness in these conversations is usually a negotiating tactic dressed as flexibility. I was specific in return. I told him what Ardent's terms would need to look like. I told him what I was not willing to dilute and what I was open to structuring creatively. I told him I would need 30 days to review any formal proposal with my team and my counsel before responding. He said, 30 days is reasonable. I said, I'll be in touch. We shook hands at the door. He said, it's good to meet the person who actually built this. I said, it's good to be met. I walked out into Sweet Auburn and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the April morning, the neighborhood around me carrying its history in its bones the way certain places do, the weight of what was built here and taken and built again and taken again, and built once more by people who understood that persistence in the face of erasure is its own form of power. My phone buzzed. Priya, how did it go? I typed back, well, I'll brief the team Thursday. Then the calls started coming. Not all at once, that's not how these things work. They came in over the following 2 weeks, each one a small data point in a pattern that was becoming impossible to ignore. Jeffrey Marsh, who ran a mid-sized development firm in Midtown and had been a peripheral figure in Ardent's orbit for years, called to discuss a potential referral arrangement. A woman named Dr. Anita Botung, who chaired the board of a nonprofit focused on Black economic development in Atlanta, reached out about a keynote. 2 former clients who had quietly moved their business elsewhere during the period when Marcus was the primary relationship manager called to inquire about re-engaging. Each call told the same story from a different angle. The story was, the room had recalibrated. I do not think this is romantic or simple. I know that some of these people had known, on some level, what was true about Ardent all along, and had chosen Marcus's narrative, because it was easier, because he was louder, because proximity to his confidence felt like proximity to success. I am not naive about the way rooms work or the way credit moves toward volume. I had watched it happen in real time for 11 years. What had changed was not their perception of me. What had changed was the absence of the counter-narrative. Marcus's story that he had built something that he was the architect required his continued presence and credibility to sustain itself. Without that, the underlying structure became visible. And the underlying structure had always been me. Marcus during this period was quiet. Diane's spin class contact reported that Sienna had not returned. Bernard, the accountant, had apparently been released Marcus restructuring his personal finances in ways that suggested a significant recalibration of his lifestyle. The Buckhead house, which I had heard was listed quietly with a boutique brokerage, had not yet found a buyer. I did not track these developments with satisfaction, exactly. What I felt was closer to the absence of something. The absence of the anticipatory tension that had lived in my body for the better part of a year, the awareness of a threat that was no longer approaching because it had already arrived and been addressed and was now receding. One Thursday afternoon, I was leaving the Ardent offices when I passed through the lobby and noticed our receptionist, a young woman named Tasha, who had been with us 8 months, and who had the particular attentiveness of someone still learning which details matter, looking at the company name etched into the glass behind her desk. She said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Go ahead." She said, "Ardent. Did you name the company?" I said, "I did." She nodded like she'd suspected as much. Then she said, "I looked it up once. It means burning with passion or devotion." "It does," I said. She said, "That makes sense. For you, I mean. You can tell. I thanked her and walked out to the parking deck. I sat in my car for a moment longer than I needed to. Outside the window, the Atlanta afternoon was golden and unhurried, the kind of April light that makes the city look like something worth building. Ardent, burning with passion or devotion. I had chosen that word in 2012. At a folding table in a 2-bedroom rental off Cascade Road, exhausted and certain and completely alone in my certainty. And I had carried it for 11 years, through everything that followed. It had always been the right word. It had always been mine. It was a Tuesday in May when I finally sat in the CEO chair. Not for the first time. I'd been running Ardent from that office for months. Had been running it in every meaningful sense for 11 years. But this was the first Tuesday after the new organizational documents had been filed, after the updated corporate registry had been processed, after the business cards I had ordered 3 weeks prior had arrived in a flat white box on Priya's desk with my name on them, followed by a title that was at last accurate. Kennedy Ardent, Chief Executive Officer, Ardent Group. I sat in the chair, and I did not feel what I had expected to feel, which I think says something true about the nature of arrival. I had imagined this moment during the long months of preparation, during the 2 a.m. document reviews, and the meetings with Vivian, and the 33 days of waiting after the signing, and in my imagination, it had carried a particular weight, a cinematic gravity, the feeling of a door finally opening onto a room you had been standing outside of for a very long time. What I actually felt was quieter than that, more ordinary. The chair fit the same as it always had. The view from the window was the same midtown skyline. Priya knocked at 8:30 with a coffee she hadn't been asked to bring, set it on my desk without comment, and said, "Team stand up at 9. "I'll be there," I said. She left. I drank my coffee. I read my emails. This is what running a company actually looks like on a Tuesday morning in May. It does not look like a moment. It looks like the next thing, and then the thing after that, which is the only way anything real ever gets done. The Conrad Osei partnership had been formalized 2 weeks prior, a 22% minority stake, structured exactly as I had specified, with provisions that protected Ardent's operational independence, and my majority position with the kind of legal clarity that I now understood from hard experience to be non-negotiable. Conrad had not pushed back on the terms. He had read every page of the agreement, including the ones buried in the middle, which I had noted and appreciated. We had signed on a Thursday. I had used my own pen. The 3 new markets, Nashville, Charlotte, and Birmingham, were in various stages of early development. Priya was leading Nashville. I had promoted her to VP of Expansion the week after the Wednesday meeting in Buckhead, a decision I had been building toward for months, but had waited to announce until the equity situation was resolved and the organizational structure was stable. She had cried briefly and efficiently in my office doorway, then composed herself and asked when she could start. I had said, "You already did." There was a morning in late April that I keep returning to, not because anything significant happened, but because of the quality of the ordinary. I had come in early, the office still quiet, the cleaning crew just finishing up. I walked through the space the way I sometimes do when no one else is there. Not inspecting, just moving through it, feeling the specific texture of a place that exists because of choices you made. The glass walls, the coffee machine that cost more than my first car, the framed print in the hallway that Priya had hung without asking, because she knew I'd like it, which I did. I stopped at the window in the main conference room and looked out at the city. Atlanta, in the early morning, has a particular quality of light that I have never been able to accurately describe to anyone who hasn't seen it. Something about the way it comes in, low and golden, and catches the glass of the buildings, turning them briefly luminous before the day fully arrives, and everything becomes ordinary again. I have seen that light from this window for 4 years. I have never taken a photograph of it. Some things are better kept as experience. I thought about Marcus that morning. Not with anger. Anger had been useful once, and I had used it precisely, and it was done now. What I thought about was the version of him I had first known, the one from the early years when we were both still becoming. There had been something real there. I am certain of that. Whatever he had become later, whatever calculations had replaced the person I married at the beginning, had been real, and I do not think the truth requires me to revise it. What I thought was, I hope he finds something honest to build. I thought it plainly, without investment in the outcome. It was simply what I thought. I heard the elevator open and Priya's voice in the hallway, and then the sound of the office waking up around me, and I turned from the window and went back to work. The gold bracelet was on my wrist. It always is. My mother asked me once years ago why I never took it off. I told her it was because she had given it to me the day I registered Ardent with the state of Georgia, and I had decided that day that I would wear it until the company became what I knew it could be. She had said, and when it does, I had said, then I'll wear it because I want to. I wear it because I want to. There is something I want to say to you before we end, and I want to say it plainly, because I think you came here for more than a story. What happened to me was not unique. The specifics, the page 7, the Mont Blanc pen, the Wednesday meeting on the 22nd floor, those are mine. But the shape of it, the years of invisible work and misdirected credit, and the slow erosion of your own certainty about what you built and whether you're allowed to claim it. That shape is familiar to a great many people, and most of them are women. And most of those women have never had a Vivian Cole or a Conrad Osei call on a Wednesday morning. What I want you to take from this is not that you need a page 7. Not everyone has leverage in a legal document. Not everyone has equity to protect. What I want you to take is the posture of someone who documents instead of reacts, who observes before she moves, who understands that the most powerful thing she can do in a room full of people who have underestimated her is nothing, not yet, not until the moment is exactly right, and everything she needs is already in place. My grandmother said the best move is the one they don't see until it's already done. My mother said, patience is not weakness. Most people confuse the two because they've never seen patience deployed as a weapon. I say, know what you built. Know it precisely, document it carefully, and do not let anyone's certainty about their own importance cause you to doubt the evidence of your own hands. The folding table is still in storage. I kept it. People think that's sentimental. It isn't. It's a document. The earliest one. Proof of where this started and who was sitting at it at 2 in the morning while the city slept. Me was always me. And whatever room you're sitting in right now, whatever version of the folding table you're working from, whatever company or project or life you are building in the quiet hours when no one is watching, I need you to know that the work is not invisible just because the wrong people aren't seeing it. The right people are paying attention. And page 7 is already written. You just have to make sure you're the one holding the pen.